So it is with great pleasure I introduce our final speaker for today's session, Professor Dominique Charpin from the Collège de France, who joins us to talk about Samsu-iluna and the end of occupation of Ur. So Professor Charpin, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm very pleased to have been invited to take part in this symposium commemorating the centenary of the start of Woolley's excavation in Ur. I am speaking to you from Nasiriyeh, and having left Ur a week ago. I was indeed fortunate to be chosen as epigraphist by Elizabeth Stone when she took over the excavation of the site in 2015 at the invitation of the regretted Abdulhamir Al-Hamdani. Oops. I am indebted to the renewed trust of Brad Harford as well as Adelaide Otto that I have been able to continue this year's deciphering and exploitation of the epigraphic finds of the fourth season. As you will see, my paper stems from concerns directly related to this field work. As is well known, Ur, after the fall of the Third Dynasty, fell first to the kings of Isin, then to the kings of Larsa. In 1763, when Hammurabi defeated the king of Larsa, Rimsin, the city was integrated into the kingdom of Babylon and remained there under his son Samsu-iluna. Ur was destroyed and abandoned during the reign of the latter, but the circumstances of this event remain poorly known. After presenting the historiography of the question, which, following Woolley, attributes the destruction of Ur to Samsu-iluna himself, we shall study the set of texts dating from the last 5 months of year 10 and the whole of Samsu-iluna's year 11 after the end of Rimsin II's revolt. Finally, a new hypothesis will be presented on the circumstances in which the city was sacked and then abandoned in the course of the following year. There is a historiographical paradox. Following Woolley, everyone has been convinced that Samsu-iluna was responsible for the destruction of Ur. Yet, several recent data indicate the price Ur had in the eyes of Hammurabi's son. Woolley was struck by the evidence of the violent destruction of the old Babylonian city and looked for someone to blame. He believed he had found him in Samsu-iluna. His most detailed description is contained in his final report on the old Babylonian period. I quote, "Neither in the houses nor in the temple was a single tablet found of later date than Samsu-iluna's 11th year. Now the 11th year of Samsu-iluna is that which was marked by the revolt of the Sumerian cities of the south against the suzerainty of Babylon. It is called the year in which the king destroyed the walls of Ur. The temple of Ningal had been destroyed by fire. Its inner chambers and the sanctuary were filled with wood ash, and the masses of broken stone vessels from the treasury lying in the ash layer proved that the building had been looted as well as burnt. Most of the houses also bore marks of fire, the mud brick of the upper part of their walls being burnt to a deep red and their pavements covered with charred woods. It's impossible not to connect the archaeological and the literary evidence, and we are forced to the conclusion that the phrase "destroyed the walls of Ur" is an understatement of the truth, and that Samsu-iluna punished the rebellion by the complete destruction of the city. The houses then were violently overthrown at one and the same time in 1738 BC. In writing this, Woolley had simply forgotten the fact that a year name commemorates an event that took place in the previous year, according to a principle discovered by Thureau d'Angin as early as 1914. The destruction of the wall of Ur, celebrated in the name of year 11, thus took place in the 10th year of Samsu-iluna. The fact that the buildings contain texts dated to the 11th year of Samsu-iluna is proof that, despite the destruction of the city wall in the 10th year, life was resumed thereafter. It should also be noted that further down, Woolley refers to the destruction of the city in Samsu-iluna's 12th year without realizing the contradiction with what he wrote above. Woolley's authority is such that since then it has been repeated that it was Samsu-iluna who destroyed Ur. Limiting ourselves to recent work, we note Tim Claydon's agreement with Woolley's conclusion, I quote, his suggestion that the destruction had been the responsibility of Samsu-iluna, who destroyed the city wall after crushing a general revolt in the south, appears acceptable. Harriet Crawford also wrote, "There is no doubt about the destruction the city suffered after an ill-advised rebellion against Hammurabi's son Samsu-iluna, who destroyed the city walls and most of the major monuments, setting fire to the residential areas. He also apparently laid waste to the surrounding countryside, breaching the canals and destroying the agricultural base, thereby making living conditions almost impossible in the ruined city." Igor Diakonov was even more radical than Woolley, attributing real massacres to the soldiers of Samsu-iluna. According to him, the 50 children's graves in house number 7 Quiet Street correspond to the pupils of Kuningal's family who were killed by the Babylonian army. However, if these were traces of the destruction of Ur by Samsu-iluna's soldiers, the corpses should not have been buried before the house was burnt. The explanation of these numerous burials of children is not easy, but the idea of a massacre by Babylonian soldiers is not likely. Even a very good expert on the Old Babylonian period like Mardenstall wrote, "It is possible that the Gipar in Ur was destroyed by Samsu-iluna together with the rest of the city in his year 11. However, the Gipar is still attested in the year 12, as we shall see." In 2019, Piotr Michalowski, usually more critical, repeated the usual line attributing the destruction of number 7 Quiet Street to the armies of Samsu-iluna. I quote, "The Ur building, number 7 Quiet Street, was undoubtedly destroyed at the end of Rimsin insurgency, that is to say Rimsin II, when Samsu-iluna's armies took over the city and inflicted their vengeance." And the most recent summary of the history of Ur in the Old Babylonian period by Catherine de Greef takes up the traditional consensus. If we attempt a balance, we can say that the name of Samsu-iluna's year 11, commemorating the destruction of the walls of Ur and Uruk, refers to an event that took place in year 10. As far as Ur is concerned, it is obviously the end of the revolt of the inhabitants of the city who had rallied to Rimsin II, who was considered by Samsu-iluna to be a usurper. Ur was punished by the destruction of its wall, but by no means of its houses. Woolley's conclusion, universally accepted as we have just seen, also clashes with a recent observation. It is now clear how important the city of Ur seems to have been for Samsu-iluna. This is shown by the offering of a throne to the god Nana, the patron deity of Ur, which the Babylonian king commemorated in the name of his 5th year. To this must be added the testimony of literary texts. In 2015, Elizabeth Stone and Paul Zimonski began excavating a large old Babylonian house northwest of the AH quarter. In 2017, they discovered the records of a Babylonian general named Abisum, who was evidently installed by Hammurabi to control the city. This is the first time there is such evidence of the Babylonian army's occupation of the city. 2 of the tablets in the Abisum archives record an expenditure of fish for the king's meal at the beginning of year 5 of Samsu-iluna's reign. This shows that the Babylonian ruler had then come as far as Ur, a fact hitherto ignored. The purpose of his journey was clearly to offer a throne to the god Nanasin in person. This gift was deemed important enough by the king to be commemorated in the formula that gave its name to the year 5. Year when Samsu-iluna the king had a throne made as an offering to Nana, his personal deity, and when he installed it in the Ekishnugal, his pure temple. This Ekishnugal is a temple of Ur, not its namesake in Babylon. One might also be tempted to interpret this formula critically. Caesar pontem fecit. When Samsu-iluna writes, I installed in, one could understand it as I gave the order to install it in. This would be a mistake in this case. The king of Babylon obviously came in person to offer the throne dedicated to the principal god of Ur. This had been ignored until now, and this important element of the history of Samsu-iluna's reign is revealed to us by modest accounting documents. Such a visit clearly shows the importance Samsu-iluna attached to the ancient southern metropolis. A long-known text could be placed in this chronological context. It is a hymn addressed to King Samsu-iluna with the formula, O Samsu-iluna, my king. I had proposed that this hymn, in which the god Enki and the deities of his entourage occupy a very important place, was composed on the occasion of a visit of the king of Babylon to the sanctuary of Eridu, dedicated to Enki. This visit may well have taken place early in Samsu-iluna 5, during Samsu-iluna's stay in Ur. Babylon's annexation of southern Mesopotamia did not prevent its king from showing respect for this region, ancient Sumer, which they knew to be the cradle of their civilization. Another literary text must be mentioned here. This is the prayer for Samsu-iluna, classified by ETCCL CSL as Samsu-iluna G. Here is the translation of the passage. He greeted Enki, Asalim, and the son of Eridu, the great gods, while sitting majestically on the golden throne of kingship, with head high in heroic strength in its midst, and an Akkadian glows as, on your golden throne of kingship, whose head is raised high in the strength of your heroism, may you sit majestically, Samsu-iluna, double king, the king of Ur and king of Larsa, the king of Sumer and Akkad. Since this is not a royal inscription, Samsu-iluna's double title in this text has so far escaped the attention of historians. It is remarkable to see here the Babylonian king adorned with the double title of King of Ur and King of Larsa, as Gungunum or Abisare were long before him. This shows the important place that Ur held in the eyes of Samsu-iluna and the scholars around him. Is it conceivable, then, that Samsu-iluna destroyed Ur? It is known that the city joined Ramses II when he led 1,000 revolt. The records bear witness to this, since no dated texts from Samsu-iluna for year 9 and the first 7 months of year 10 were found at Ur. During this period, the texts were dated with the year name of Ramses II from the 10th of month 3 to the 30th of month 12, so during more than 10 months. Many authors have believed that Samsu-iluna, disillusioned, sought revenge on the people of Ur by destroying their city. But a precise chronology tells us otherwise. Ramses II was defeated by Samsu-iluna. The use of Samsu-iluna's year names during the last months of year 10 and all of the year 11 shows that the authority of the Babylonian king was again recognized. Mark van der Meerop was only partly a victim of Woolley's claim that Samsu-iluna was responsible for the destruction of Ur. He wrote in his 1992 book, "In Ur, Samsu-iluna year names only reappeared in the 8th month of that year, that is to say, Samsu-iluna 10, and the city seems to have been recaptured with great force, because Samsu-iluna named his 11th year after the destruction of the walls of Ur and Uruk, and the archaeological information indicates a general destruction of the city in the year 1740. Despite this, some resettlement must have taken place, as there are 3 documents from Ur dated in Samsu-iluna's 11th year and 1 in its 12th. What happened to Ur after the reconquest? As written documentation disappears, we have to look to archaeology for information. There are, in fact, more than 4 texts after the destruction of the city wall, which took place in the course of year 10. UIT 5 gave no less than 5 texts dated between the 15 of month 8 of Samsu-iluna 10 and the 30 of month 12 of Samsu-iluna 11, to which must be added 6 texts published in YOS 12. And since 2017, 4 texts from the Abyssum archives have been added. Here is the table of these texts. In total, therefore, we have 14 texts for the 17 months from month 8 of year 10 to month 12 of year 11 of Samsu-iluna. That is to say, an average of 10 texts per year, considerably more than in the years before the revolt of Ramses II, when there were less than 6 texts per year. Samsu-iluna year 11 is attested in Ur from the beginning of month 1 to the end of month 12. And the 7 preserved texts show nothing unusual. Everything seems to function normally. There is no break with the previous years, and in several cases, the family archives that go back to Ramses I continue without interruption. This is particularly true of the Eli Palsam archives, discovered at number 1 Store Street, or those of Sinishmeni, discovered during old irregular excavations. Oh no. I'm sorry, I lose my, yeah. Prosopography shows that many of the people attested in the documents dated to the years 10 and 11 of Samsu-iluna were already known earlier. Here are some examples without seeking to be exhaustive. What does the name of the year 12 say? It mentions a revolt, so an event that took place in year 11. The year in which King Samsu-iluna, against whom all the enemy countries had rebelled, defeated the army of Sumer and Akkad thanks to the superb strength that Marduk gave him. It should be noted that there is no specific mention here of a revolt of Ur, let alone a destruction of the city. And it should be remembered that Samsu-iluna's year 11 is attested in the Ur documentation until the last day, the 30th day of month 12. It is therefore not possible for Samsu-iluna to have destroyed Ur in his 11th year. The question of who was responsible for the destruction of Ur, revealed by the excavations in an unmistakable way, is therefore still open. It seems to me that a new solution can be proposed based on the observations made in 2017 in the house of the Babylonian general Abyssum. The remains of the Abyssum archive, just over 40 tablets and fragments, were indeed found around and inside the burial vault. The tablets were not deliberately placed in the vault, but fell into it when the vault was violated during the sacking of the house. The case of two other houses where archives were found by Woolley in tombs must be interpreted in the same way. It is therefore clear that looting immediately followed the abandonment of the houses by their inhabitants, who left their archives there, at least in part. The houses were looted just after the flight of their inhabitants, thus after the end of the year 11 of the Babylonian king Samsu-iluna. It should be remembered that no text from southern Babylonian kingdom is dated to Samsu-iluna's year 12. There is, however, an exception. A U85 tablet from Samsu-iluna year 12, which is from month 8. Thanks to Ur Online, we know that the tablet in question was found in the Giparku, a building that served both as a residence for the entomb priestess of the god Nana and as a temple for his wife, the goddess Ningal. This tablet establishes that 3 men were responsible for the duties of sweeper and doorkeeper of the Ningan temple in relation to the palace for a period of 6 months, from month 8 of Samsu-iluna 12, date of the text, to the first month of the following year. What is very interesting is that a commitment is made to the palace, so to the Babylonian authority. However, it is necessary to take into account the nature of the prebends which are the subject of this text. They are the offices of sweepers and of doorkeepers. Until now, the prebends of doorkeepers have probably not been understood in their reality. The individuals holding of this office had to prevent possible thieves from entering the temple, or at least from leaving it. This text thus shows how the guard of the temple of the goddess Ningal was reorganized in month 8 of Samsu-iluna year 12 for the next 6 months. This was obviously to prevent looters from lurking about and taking the treasures still in the sanctuary. And the text records a commitment made by the 3 officials to Samsu-iluna. In the end, what was intended to be avoided happened. The Giparku was looted and destroyed. So many traces of destruction found during the excavation and attributed by Woolley to Samsu-iluna were in fact due to looting, and particularly in the area of the tombs. This is where the looters hoped to find the most valuable offerings. Marc van der Meerop proposed another analysis. After taking into account the text of UIT 5/868, he stated, I quote, Samsu-iluna's administration showed thus concern for the Giparu and its cult 2 years after the reconquest of Ur, and it seems unlikely that the building had been burnt down before his 12th year. The Babylonian troops were then not responsible for the sack of the building. That could have happened during the subsequent rebellion against Samsu-iluna, or, more likely, its suppression, reported in that king's 14th year name. Samsu-iluna, the king, by his great power, slaughtered the rebellious enemy kings who had caused Akkad to revolt with their own weapons, even if Ur is not mentioned as a participant. The severity of the destruction, as noticed in the archaeological record, may signal the frustration this king felt after dealing with repeated revolts in his southern territories. End quote. We see that this new scenario still attributes the destruction of Ur to Samsu-iluna, but postpones it to year 13, the event being commemorated in the name of year 14. The problem is that the wording of the year names must be taken seriously. Akkad cannot refer to the region of Ur. Such an interpretation seems to me to be excluded, and it would also not help to understand why, with the exception of UIT 5/868, there are no texts in Ur after the end of Samsu-iluna year 11. The parallel with Uruk seems to me very instructive. At Uruk, once the usurper Rimanum was defeated by Samsu-iluna, there was no reoccupation under the Babylonian rule. The most recent tablets date from the rebel king Rimanum. There is no tablet dated by Samsu-iluna 10 or 11. The traces of fire in the palace of Sinkashid are attributable to the Babylonian army, and we know that the inhabitants of Uruk went into exile in North Babylonia in the region of Pikasi and Kish. The situation in Ur was quite different. The city had joined the rebellion of Rimsin II, which had started in Lhasa. Ur was recaptured by Samsu-iluna before month 8 of year 10, and its wall destroyed. Year 11 seems to have been normal, Babylonian rule having been restored. A new revolt against Samsu-iluna seems to have broken out at the beginning of year 12. Among the inhabitants of Ur who rallied to the Babylonians, some chose the path of exile, abandoning their homes. But others, probably fewer in numbers, decided to resist the rebels. We still see them guarding the temple of Ningal in month 8 of Samsu-iluna 12. Despite their efforts, the city was then completely looted and destroyed. You may find the choice of topic of my paper not very appropriate in a conference intended to celebrate the centenary of Woolley's excavation in Ur. But commemoration can perfectly well be accompanied by critical distance. Woolley did a sufficiently remarkable job for us not to retain all the conclusions of his work today. And it is in good part thanks to the data that he himself discovered that we can today give a different interpretation of the end of Ur at the time of Samsu-iluna. It exempts the king of Babylon from the responsibility of the destructions noted by Woolley. I hope I convinced you of this, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Dominique, for that wonderful rewriting of Woolley's influential ideas. Do have a few questions coming in, so if I can share them with you. Obviously, very grateful for your taking the time in Iraq. It's a deep in the night there. But what do you make of the mention of the fortress of the Mount of Eanna? Well, there's the question for you, which might be easier than me reading it.
Yeah, there are some mentions of people from Uruk, troops from Uruk and the south in the Dur-Abi-Eshur tablets. The problem is to know whether these persons were really in Uruk, or when they moved, if they didn't rename some places according to the places they were from. So it's well known that people in exile have a tendency to transport with them the realities. For instance, we know very well that in Sipar, you have people who are called judges of Lhasa, and they gave a judgment to people who are clearly in exile during Abi-Eshur period. So I would say that this is not a proof that Uruk was really inhabited and under the control of Abi-Eshur at that time. But we may have surprises, of course.
Thank you. Let's check the other questions. No, just praise for a wonderful talk. So yeah, thank you very much indeed for that. Oh, I think let me just check in. Yes, one more, if I may. This is a question regarding information. There is the question.
Yeah, the tablets are all Babylonian or earlier from the excavations in 2015, but there are extremely few later texts. A fragment of Neo-Babylonian period, for instance, but we have tablets for the Akkadian period, for the O3 period, and above all for the Old Babylonian period. And it's the same situation for the season which has just been concluded a week ago. So if your question, Jonathan, is do we have more Kassite period tablets, the answer is no.
Very good. Thank you so much indeed. And thank you for concluding what I think everyone will probably agree has been a really rich and rewarding day, and grateful very much to all the speakers. Despite the technical issues we encountered, mainly I have to say out of the UK rather than from places like Iraq, that it's been a terrific experience. And I thank all the speakers, but also, of course, all the audience. And I hope very much that you'll come back tomorrow for our second day of the Colloquium, where we'll continue the journey, starting in the Old Babylonian period and moving forward in time. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much indeed.